Sarah Chen was 42 years old, a high school English teacher from Portland, and at her father's funeral, while she was inside the chapel saying goodbye to the man who raised her, her husband of 15 years was outside in the parking lot laughing with another woman. Her brother filmed the entire thing on his phone. What she did with that footage destroyed her husband's life completely, cost him his medical practice, his reputation, and $3.6 million. And she didn't lose a single night of sleep over it. She had no idea her husband was having an affair. None. But when her brother James pulled her aside 3 days after they buried their father and showed her that video, something inside Sarah shattered and then immediately reformed into something harder, colder, more determined than she'd ever been in her life. In that parking lot video, while Sarah was inside crying over her father's casket, her husband, Dr. Michael Chen, was smiling, touching another woman's arm, leaning in close, completely comfortable, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. What Sarah did in the next 60 days was methodical, devastating, and absolutely justified. Before diving into exactly how she dismantled a man who thought he was untouchable, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Drop your location in the comments. This story is about grief, betrayal, and the kind of justice that comes when you push the wrong person too far. Let's go back to the beginning, to when Sarah thought she had a partner who would stand by her through anything. Sarah met Michael Chen 18 years ago at a community health fair. She was 24, fresh out of graduate school with her teaching degree, volunteering at an information booth. He was 28, a third-year resident in cardiology at Oregon Health Sciences University, giving free blood pressure screenings. She remembered watching him with patience, how gentle he was, how he took time to explain things in terms they could understand. When her shift ended, he asked if she wanted to grab coffee. They talked for 3 hours about everything. He told her about growing up in San Francisco, his parents who'd immigrated from Taiwan, the pressure to become a doctor, how he actually loved it despite the grueling hours. She told him about her childhood in Portland, her father who was a contractor, her mother who died of breast cancer when Sarah was 19, how teaching felt like honoring her mother who'd been a teacher too. They started dating, and despite his insane resident schedule, Michael made time for her. He'd show up at her apartment at midnight after a shift, exhausted but wanting to see her. He'd text her during rare breaks, sweet messages about missing her. On his days off, they'd explore Portland together, hiking Forest Park, trying new restaurants, going to Powell's bookstore where they'd spend hours. He seemed genuinely interested in her work, asking about her students, listening to her talk about literature and teaching philosophy. When she got her first teaching job at Roosevelt High School, he brought her flowers and took her to dinner to celebrate. He made her feel like her career mattered just as much as his, even though he was becoming a cardiologist and she was a high school teacher. Michael proposed after 2 years. He took her to Cannon Beach. They were walking along the shore at sunset, and he got down on one knee right there in the sand. "I want to spend my life with you," he said. "You make me better. You keep me grounded. You remind me what matters." She said yes immediately, tears streaming down her face. They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the Japanese garden. Her father walked her down the aisle, proud and emotional. Michael's parents flew in from San Francisco. It was intimate, meaningful, perfect. During their vows, Michael promised to support her dreams, be her partner through everything life threw at them, and love her unconditionally. She promised the same. They meant it. At least she did. The first few years of marriage were challenging, but good. Michael finished his residency and joined a prestigious cardiology practice. Sarah was teaching full-time, developing her curriculum, connecting with students. They bought a beautiful Craftsman house in the Irvington neighborhood, spent weekends renovating it together. They talked about having kids someday, maybe 2, once their careers were more established. Michael worked long hours, but they maintained connection. They'd have breakfast together every morning, and most nights he'd be home by 8. They'd cook dinner together, talk about their days, maintain intimacy. Friday nights were date night, non-negotiable. They'd try new restaurants, go to movies, sometimes just stay home and cook something elaborate together. Sarah's father, Robert, adored Michael. They'd bonded immediately, spending hours talking about home renovation projects, watching Trailblazers games together, going fishing in the summer. When her father needed open-heart surgery 7 years into their marriage, Michael arranged for the best cardiac surgeon at his hospital to perform it, sat with Sarah through the entire 8-hour procedure, held her hand when the surgeon came out with good news. That surgery bought her father another 8 years. Michael had saved his life. How could Sarah have known that the man who saved her father's life would betray her at his funeral? The marriage stayed strong for about 10 years. Then subtle things started changing. Michael hired a new nurse practitioner at his practice, a woman named Vanessa Rodriguez, 31 years old, recently divorced, ambitious. He mentioned her casually at first. Vanessa handled this patient really well. Vanessa caught a potential medication interaction I almost missed. Vanessa stayed late to help me with paperwork. Sarah didn't think much of it. Medical practices need good staff. Her husband was a cardiologist. Of course, he worked closely with nurse practitioners. She trusted him completely. But the mentions increased. The late nights became more frequent. Michael started going to more conferences, always saying the practice needed representation. It was good for business. He'd come home from these conferences energized in a way that seemed off, talking about new techniques and research, but also mentioning Vanessa had been there. They'd attended panels together, networked with other practices. Sarah noticed, but rationalized. They worked together. Professional development was normal. She pushed down the small voice that said something felt wrong. Their intimacy decreased. They went from making love regularly to maybe twice a month. Michael blamed stress, long hours, the demands of his practice. When Sarah would try to initiate, he'd say he was exhausted, had a big procedure in the morning, needed sleep. She'd lie next to him feeling rejected and confused, but she told herself this was normal for a long marriage, especially with demanding careers. The passion couldn't always be there. She was wrong about so many things. About 2 years before her father's funeral, Sarah's father started declining. He was 73. His heart was failing despite the surgery Michael had arranged years ago. He needed more care, more support. Sarah stepped up, visiting him multiple times a week, taking him to appointments, helping with errands. Michael came along less and less. Too busy at the practice, he'd say. Sarah understood. Michael was saving lives. Her father had Sarah, and that's what mattered. But sometimes she'd see other husbands supporting their wives through aging parents, and she'd feel a flicker of resentment that Michael wasn't there more. She never said anything. She didn't want to be demanding. Her father moved into their house 6 months before he died. His heart was failing. He couldn't live alone anymore. Sarah converted their guest room into a comfortable space for him, arranged home health care, adjusted her teaching schedule to be there more. Michael was supportive, saying, "Of course your father should be with us. We'll make it work." But he started spending even more time at the office. He'd leave early, come home late, sometimes sleep in his home office, saying he didn't want to disturb Sarah when he came in after midnight. She was so focused on her father, on managing his care and her job and everything, that she didn't see what was happening. Or maybe she didn't want to see. The last 3 months of her father's life were brutal. He was in and out of the hospital, his heart failing progressively, Sarah watching the man who'd raised her after her mother died, slowly losing himself. Michael attended some hospital visits, but not all. He'd say he couldn't leave his patients. The practice was overwhelmed. He'd check in when he could. Once, Sarah broke down crying in the hospital cafeteria, overwhelmed and scared, and she called Michael begging him to come. He said he was in the middle of a procedure. He'd come later. He didn't show up until the next morning. When she confronted him about it, he got defensive. "I'm a doctor, Sarah. I can't just abandon my patients because you're having a hard time. That's not fair." She felt guilty for asking, guilty for needing him. She apologized. She actually apologized for wanting her husband there while her father was dying. Robert Chen died on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah was with him, holding his hand. Michael was at the office. She called him crying, unable to speak. He said he'd be right there, but it took him 2 hours to arrive. When he got to the hospital, he hugged her, said the right things, but she felt his distraction. His phone kept buzzing. He kept checking it. "Your father just died," she thought, "and you can't put your phone down." But she was too devastated to process anger. She was drowning in grief. The funeral was scheduled for Friday, 3 days later. Sarah spent those days in a fog, planning the service with her brother James, picking out her father's suit, writing a eulogy, calling relatives. Michael was present but absent, if that makes sense. Physically there, but emotionally somewhere else. He'd check his phone constantly, take calls in another room, seem irritated when Sarah needed him. The night before the funeral, she broke down completely, sobbing about losing her father, and Michael held her but kept looking at his phone over her shoulder. She saw him texting someone, his thumbs moving quickly. "Who are you texting?" she asked. "Just the office," he said, letting them know I'll be unavailable tomorrow. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? The funeral was at Rose City Cemetery, a beautiful place with old trees and rolling hills. Sarah had arranged everything meticulously. Her father's favorite flowers, music he loved, a program with photos from throughout his life. About 150 people attended. Michael stood beside her during the service, holding her hand, looking appropriately somber. Her brother James was on her other side, supporting her through the hardest day of her life. When it was time for Sarah to deliver the eulogy, she stood at the podium looking at her father's casket and barely made it through. She talked about how he'd raised her and James alone after their mother died, how he'd supported every dream she had, how he'd taught her about integrity and strength. She talked about family dinners and hiking trips and his terrible jokes and how he'd always been there. Her voice broke multiple times. She saw people crying, saw James wiping tears, saw Michael in the front row. His face was sympathetic, but she caught him checking his watch. At her father's funeral, he checked his watch. After the service, there was a reception at their house. Sarah had arranged for catering, had cleaned and prepared everything the day before. People filled their home, sharing memories of her father, offering condolences. Sarah moved through it mechanically, accepting hugs, thanking people for coming, barely holding herself together. Michael was by her side for some of it, but kept disappearing, taking work calls, he'd say when she asked where he'd been. "The hospital needs me. Even today," she thought. "Even today, he can't just be present." About an hour into the reception, Michael came to her and said he needed to run to the hospital for an emergency. A patient was crashing. His colleague needed backup. Sarah stared at him. "Today? Really?" "I'm so sorry," he said, kissing her forehead. "I'll be back as soon as I can. Your brother is here. Your friends are here. You'll be okay." And he left. He left his wife at her father's funeral reception to go deal with a work emergency. She watched him go, numb, thinking, this is my life now. This is what I married. The reception wound down around 6 p.m. People left offering final condolences. James stayed to help clean up. As they were working, he said, "Sarah, I need to show you something." His face was serious, angry even. She followed him to the kitchen where he pulled out his phone. "I went outside during the service," he said, "needed air. And I saw something you need to see." He pulled up a video and handed her the phone. The video showed the parking lot at Rose City Cemetery. Sarah recognized it immediately. The timestamp showed 11:47 a.m., right in the middle of her eulogy. She pressed play. The camera zoomed in on Michael standing next to his BMW, the same car they'd driven to the funeral together. He was talking to a woman, a beautiful Hispanic woman in a black dress. They were standing close, too close. As Sarah watched, the woman touched Michael's arm and said something. Michael laughed, actually laughed, threw his head back, genuine amusement. The woman leaned in closer. Michael put his hand on her lower back. They stood there for a full minute talking, smiling, completely comfortable with each other. Then Michael's phone buzzed, he looked at it, and they both walked toward the chapel. Not together exactly, but close enough. Sarah watched the video 3 times without speaking. James stood beside her, furious. "That's his nurse practitioner," he said. "I looked her up on the practice website after I filmed this. Vanessa Rodriguez. While you were inside crying over Dad, while you were giving that eulogy, he was out here with her, laughing." Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, like her heart was physically breaking into pieces. She thought about Michael saying he had to leave the reception early for an emergency. She thought about all the late nights, the conferences, the distance, the rejection. She thought about her father dying and Michael not being there. She thought about everything, and suddenly it all made sense. She handed the phone back to James. "Send that to me," she said. Her voice was steady, cold. James looked at her carefully. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," she said, "but send it to me now." Michael came home around 9 p.m. Sarah was in their bedroom, still in her funeral dress. He came in looking tired. "Hey," he said softly, "how are you holding up?" She looked at him. This man she'd loved for 15 years, this man she'd built a life with and felt nothing, just emptiness where her love used to be. "I'm fine," she lied. "How was the emergency?" He launched into some story about a patient in cardiac arrest, how they'd barely saved him, how exhausted he was. She watched him lie to her face, so practiced, so smooth. "Okay," she said when he finished. "I'm going to sleep." She turned away from him, and for the first time in their marriage, she was grateful he didn't try to touch her. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to work. She needed time to think, to process, to figure out what to do. After Michael left for the office, she sat in her home office and watched that parking lot video 50 times. She analyzed every moment, the way Vanessa touched him, the way he responded, the familiarity between them. This wasn't new. This wasn't a recent development. They'd been doing this for a while, maybe years, and he'd brought her to Sarah's father's funeral. That was the part that destroyed her. He'd brought his mistress to the funeral, couldn't even wait until after the service to be with her, had stood in a parking lot laughing while Sarah eulogized her father. Sarah Chen was not a vengeful person by nature. She was a teacher, patient and understanding, someone who believed in redemption and second chances. But something had changed in her watching that video. Michael had taken everything from her: her marriage, her trust, her support system during the worst time of her life. He'd made her doubt herself, feel guilty for needing him, isolated from recognizing what was happening. And he'd done it all while presenting himself as a caring husband, a dedicated doctor, a good man. That was the thing that made her coldest, the lie of him, the performance. For the first time in her life, Sarah wanted revenge. She started with research. She was a teacher. She knew how to research. She spent 3 days reading everything she could find about catching cheating spouses, about gathering evidence, about protecting yourself financially in divorce. She read about adultery laws in Oregon, about how affairs could impact divorce settlements. She read about medical ethics, about relationships between doctors and their staff. She took notes like she was preparing for the most important test of her life, because in a way she was. Then she called a divorce attorney, someone her brother recommended. His name was Robert Martinez, a shark who specialized in high-asset divorces. She met him in his downtown office and showed him the video. Robert watched it once, looked at her and said, "This is good, but we need more. We need proof of an ongoing affair, not just a suspicious conversation. We need evidence that will stand up in court and destroy him. Tell me everything." Sarah told him about the late nights, the conferences, the emotional distance, her suspicions. Robert took notes and then said, "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to hire a private investigator. We're going to document everything. We're going to go through his financials, and we're going to build a case so strong that he won't have any choice but to give you everything you want. Are you ready for this?" Sarah nodded. "Absolutely." Robert connected her with a private investigator named Linda Chen, no relation, a former police detective who specialized in infidelity cases. Sarah paid Linda $5,000 up front. She gave her all of Michael's information, his schedule, his patterns, Vanessa's information. Linda assured her that if there was an affair, she'd document it. "Give me 2 weeks," Linda said. Sarah went home and continued her life as if nothing had changed. She cooked dinner for Michael. She asked about his day. She slept next to him every night. And inside, she was building a case that would ruin him. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever felt this kind of betrayal, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything, and this story has an ending that makes all the pain worth it. Linda called Sarah 10 days later. "I have what you need," she said. They met at a coffee shop. Linda slid a thick envelope across the table. Inside were photographs. Michael and Vanessa at restaurants. Michael and Vanessa going into a hotel together, the Heathman in downtown Portland. Michael and Vanessa walking through Washington Park holding hands. Michael and Vanessa kissing in the parking garage at his practice. There were dozens of photos, dated and time-stamped, irrefutable proof. But Linda wasn't done. "I put a GPS tracker on his car," she said. "He's been going to an apartment in the Pearl District twice a week. I checked. It's Vanessa's apartment. He has a key. I have video of him letting himself in and not leaving until morning." Sarah's hands shook, looking at the evidence. "How long?" she asked. Linda's face was sympathetic. "Based on credit card records I was able to access, at least 3 years, maybe longer. 3 years. Sarah felt like she'd been punched. 3 years of lies. 3 years of him coming home from her apartment, getting into bed with Sarah, touching her with the same hands that had touched Vanessa. 3 years of her father's decline and death, years when Sarah needed Michael most, and he was with another woman. She wanted to scream, to break things, to burn everything down. Instead, she thanked Linda, paid her another $3,000, and took the evidence home. That night, Michael came home at 6, early for him. He seemed happy, lighter. Sarah wondered if he'd just come from Vanessa's apartment. "Hey, babe," he said, kissing her cheek. "How was your day?" "It was good," she lied. "How was yours?" He launched into a story about a successful procedure. She smiled and nodded, and inside, she was dead. The next day, Sarah met with Robert again. She brought all of Linda's evidence. Robert looked through everything, and for the first time, he smiled. "This is perfect," he said. "This is everything we need." But Sarah had one more card to play. "I want to check his finances," she said. "I want to know if he's been using marital funds to support this affair." Robert nodded approvingly. Smart. He connected her with a forensic accountant. Within a week, the accountant had gone through 3 years of credit card statements, bank records, everything. The findings were devastating. Michael had spent over $80,000 on Vanessa. Jewelry, clothes, hotel rooms, trips disguised as conferences that Vanessa had accompanied him on. He'd opened a separate credit card Sarah didn't know about. He'd been transferring money from their joint account to his personal account to his secret credit card, thinking Sarah would never notice. It was all there. Documented, illegal use of marital assets. Sarah took all of this evidence, everything, and filed for divorce. It was 6 weeks after her father's funeral. She'd spent those weeks playing the perfect wife while systematically destroying Michael's life. The day she filed, she also filed a complaint with the Oregon Medical Board. She detailed the relationship between Michael and Vanessa, his employee, the power dynamic, the ethical violations. She sent copies of the evidence. She didn't know if they'd do anything, but she wanted it on record. Then she sent a letter to the practice Michael worked for, informing them of the relationship, suggesting they might want to investigate. Finally, she changed the locks on their house and had divorce papers and a restraining order served to Michael at his office, in front of his colleagues and patients. Michael called her 20 times that day. She didn't answer. He showed up at the house. She didn't let him in. He tried to explain through the door. "Sarah, please, we need to talk. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain." She opened the door just enough to look at him. "There's nothing to explain," she said calmly. "I have photographs of you and Vanessa together over 3 years. I have financial records showing you spent marital funds on her. I have video of you laughing with her at my father's funeral while I eulogized him. I've filed complaints with the medical board and your practice. I've frozen our accounts. You need to get a lawyer because I'm taking everything." His face went white. "You're overreacting," he stammered. "It's not what you think." She almost laughed. "I have pictures of you going into her apartment and not leaving until morning, Michael. What exactly is it if not an affair?" He tried different tactics. Anger first. "How dare you spy on me? How dare you go through my finances? You had no right." She reminded him they were married. Those were marital finances. She had every right. Then he tried bargaining. "We can work this out. I'll end things with Vanessa. We can go to therapy. I made a mistake." She told him 3 years isn't a mistake. It's a choice you made over and over. Then desperation. "Please, Sarah, I love you. We've been together 15 years. We can fix this." And she felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, nothing. "I'm done," she said, and closed the door in his face. The divorce was brutal. Michael hired an expensive attorney who tried to fight everything. They tried to claim the evidence was obtained illegally. Robert shut that down, citing Oregon law that allowed spouses to investigate infidelity using legal means. The GPS tracker was on a car jointly owned by Sarah and Michael. The financial records were for joint accounts she had every right to access. The photographs were taken in public places where there's no expectation of privacy. Every piece of evidence was admissible. Michael's attorney tried to claim the affair was irrelevant to asset division. Oregon is a no-fault state, meaning adultery doesn't automatically affect divorce settlements. But Robert argued brilliantly that while the affair itself might not matter, Michael's use of marital funds to support the affair absolutely mattered. He'd taken money that belonged to both of them and spent it on another woman. That was dissipation of marital assets, and courts take that very seriously. Robert presented the forensic accountant's findings, showing $80,000 spent on Vanessa over 3 years. Expensive dinners at restaurants Sarah had never been to. A diamond bracelet worth $12,000. Weekend getaways to wine country disguised as medical conferences. A lease payment on Vanessa's apartment that Michael had been covering for 18 months. All of it documented, all of it using marital money, all of it while Sarah worked full-time and contributed equally to their household. The judge was not sympathetic to Michael. During one hearing, Robert presented the parking lot video from the funeral. The courtroom went silent watching Michael laugh with Vanessa while his wife eulogized her father. The judge's face hardened. Michael's attorney tried to argue it was just a conversation between colleagues, nothing inappropriate. The judge cut him off. "Counselor," she said coldly, "I've been practicing family law for 30 years. I know what an affair looks like. Don't insult my intelligence." That moment was a turning point. From then on, every ruling went in Sarah's favor. Michael's attorney tried lowball settlement offers. First, they offered to split everything 50-50, which would have been standard in Oregon. Robert rejected it immediately. Then they offered 60-40 in Sarah's favor. Still no. They offered Sarah the house, but wanted Michael to keep most of his retirement accounts. No. Robert was holding out for everything, and he had the leverage to do it. The affair, the dissipated assets, the ethics violations, the professional consequences Michael was facing. All of it meant Michael needed this divorce finalized to move on with his life, and Sarah could afford to wait. Meanwhile, the Oregon Medical Board's investigation was progressing. They'd interviewed Vanessa multiple times. Initially, she tried to deny the relationship, but when presented with photographs and evidence, she broke. She admitted to the affair, claimed it was consensual and meaningful, that they loved each other. She said Michael had told her his marriage was over, that he and Sarah were basically roommates, that they were staying together for financial reasons, but would divorce soon. All lies, of course. Sarah and Michael had been intimate right up until a few months before he died, had been planning a trip to Hawaii together, had been actively living as a married couple. But that's what Michael had told Vanessa to justify the affair. The medical board also interviewed Michael. He tried a different approach, claiming the relationship with Vanessa had started after he and Sarah separated emotionally, that it wasn't a violation of practice policies because Vanessa wasn't technically his direct report on paper, but the practice's org chart showed otherwise. Vanessa reported directly to Michael as the lead cardiologist. She was his subordinate in every meaningful way. The power dynamic was clear. The board also discovered that Michael had given Vanessa preferential treatment, better shifts, higher bonuses, overlooking performance issues that would have gotten other staff written up. He'd used his position to benefit his mistress, which was textbook ethics violation. The board's findings were released 6 months into the divorce proceedings. They didn't revoke Michael's license, which would have required more severe violations, but they issued a formal reprimand that would be on his record permanently. They mandated 50 hours of ethics training. They placed him on probation for 2 years, meaning any complaints during that time would be reviewed more strictly. And they required him to report the disciplinary action to any employer or hospital where he had privileges. That last part was the killer. Any future employer would know about the ethics violation before hiring him. The practice where Michael worked fired him 2 weeks after the board's findings were released. They'd suspended him immediately when Sarah filed her complaint, but they'd waited for the board's decision before making it permanent. The termination letter was scathing. Michael had violated practice policies, had brought negative attention to the practice, had potentially exposed them to liability. They fired Vanessa too, for the same reasons. Portland's medical community is relatively small. Word spread quickly. The prestigious Dr. Michael Chen, rising star in cardiology, had thrown away his career for an affair with his nurse practitioner. Other practices wanted nothing to do with him. Hospitals revoked his privileges. He became professionally toxic. Michael tried to salvage his career. He applied to practices outside Portland, in Seattle, in San Francisco, in smaller cities throughout the Pacific Northwest. But the medical world is interconnected. People talk. References get checked. Every application led nowhere. He even tried applying to practices back east, hoping distance from Portland would help. Still nothing. The ethics violation followed him. Finally, 8 months after being fired, he found work at a small community clinic in Salem, about 45 minutes from Portland. It was a significant step down. Instead of performing complex cardiac procedures and making $500,000 a year, he was doing basic primary care for a fraction of that salary. His career was effectively over. The financial hit was devastating too. Michael had been earning around $550,000 a year at his peak. Now he was making maybe $120,000 at the clinic. His legal fees for the divorce were enormous, over $200,000. The divorce settlement cost him millions in assets and future earnings. He had to sell his beloved BMW because he couldn't afford the payments. He moved from their beautiful Craftsman house in Irvington to a mediocre apartment in Salem. His entire life had collapsed. Sarah watched it all happen with a strange sense of detachment. She'd set these dominoes falling, but once they started, the momentum was inevitable. Michael's choices had consequences, and those consequences were playing out exactly as they should. She didn't feel triumphant exactly. She felt vindicated. There's a difference. Triumph implies gloating, enjoying someone else's pain. Vindication is about justice, about truth being recognized, about the world acknowledging that wrong was done and making it right. That's what Sarah felt, vindicated. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 year and 2 weeks after her father's funeral. Sarah sat in the courtroom with Robert beside her, listening to the judge outline the settlement terms. The house to Sarah. 65% of all marital assets to Sarah, 35% to Michael. Sarah would receive $400,000 in cash within 90 days. Michael would pay her legal fees, another $80,000. The judge asked if both parties agreed. Sarah said yes. Michael, sitting across the courtroom looking defeated, said yes. The judge signed the decree. After 15 years of marriage, it was over in less than 10 minutes. Afterward, Robert shook her hand. "You did good," he said. "You stayed strong through this whole thing. A lot of people would have settled for less." Sarah smiled. "I had good representation." Robert laughed. "You had a good case, and you had the courage to see it through. That matters." They parted ways. Sarah drove back to her house, walked through the rooms she now owned outright, and for the first time in over a year, she felt something like peace. It wasn't happiness yet. The grief of losing her father was still fresh. The betrayal still stung. But it was peace. The chaos was over. The fight was won. She could breathe again. The aftermath wasn't easy. Sarah had to rebuild her entire life. Her identity had been wrapped up in being Michael's wife for 15 years. She was Sarah Chen, married to Dr. Michael Chen, part of a power couple. Now she was just Sarah Chen, divorced high school teacher. It was disorienting at first. She had to figure out who she was outside of that marriage. She threw herself into her work, which helped. Teaching had always been her passion, but during the marriage, especially during her father's decline, she'd let it become just a job. Now she rediscovered why she'd wanted to teach in the first place: the connection with students, the joy of watching them understand concepts, the privilege of shaping young minds. She redesigned her curriculum, started an after-school writing workshop, became more involved in school leadership. Her principal noticed and encouraged her to pursue administration. Sarah also reconnected with friends she'd drifted away from during the marriage. She didn't realize it at the time, but Michael had slowly isolated her. Nothing dramatic, just small things, suggesting they skip friend gatherings because he was tired, making plans on nights she had standing commitments with friends, forcing her to choose, making subtle negative comments about her friends. Over time, her social circle had shrunk. Now she reached back out. She called old friends, apologized for being absent, explained what had happened. Most were understanding and supportive. They'd noticed her withdrawal but hadn't wanted to pry. Now they welcomed her back. One friend, Lisa, told her honestly over coffee, "We knew something was wrong. You seemed unhappy for years, but you kept saying everything was fine, so we didn't push." Sarah realized she'd been complicit in her own isolation, too proud to admit her marriage was failing, too invested in the image of having it all together. That was a hard lesson. She vowed never to hide struggle again, to ask for help when she needed it, to be honest with the people who cared about her. Sarah's relationship with her brother James deepened after everything. He'd been there through the worst of it, had supported her unconditionally, had given her the evidence that started everything. They talked more openly now about their father, about childhood, about their fears and hopes. One night over dinner, James said something that stuck with Sarah. "Dad would be proud of how you handled this. You didn't just survive. You refused to be a victim. You fought for yourself." Sarah teared up. "I keep thinking about how he wasn't here for this, how he died right before I found out." And James said, "Maybe that's why the timing worked out the way it did. Maybe you needed to handle this on your own, without depending on Dad to fix it. Maybe you needed to discover your own strength." Sarah had never thought of it that way, but he was right. If her father had been alive, she might have leaned on him too much, let him fight her battles. Instead, she'd had to fight them herself, and she'd discovered she was capable of more than she knew. Sarah also started therapy seriously. She'd done a few sessions right after the divorce was finalized, but she'd been in crisis mode, just trying to survive. Now she committed to the work of actually healing. Her therapist, Dr. Patricia Wong, was brilliant. She helped Sarah process the layered trauma of losing her father and her marriage simultaneously. She helped her understand that grief and betrayal were tangled together, that she needed to separate them to heal from each properly. She helped her identify patterns from the marriage that she needed to avoid in future relationships, ways Michael had manipulated her that she hadn't recognized at the time. Dr. Wong also helped Sarah work through anger. For months after the divorce, Sarah was furious at Michael for betraying her, at Vanessa for participating, at herself for not seeing it sooner, at her father for dying and leaving her alone. The anger was consuming, exhausting. Dr. Wong taught her that anger was valid but couldn't be where she lived permanently. They worked on transforming anger into boundaries, into self-protection, into fuel for building the life she wanted. Slowly, over many months, the constant rage faded into something more manageable. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. This happened. It was terrible. But she'd survived and was building something better. About 18 months after the divorce, Sarah felt ready to date again. She'd done the work of healing, had rebuilt her life, felt secure in who she was. A colleague set her up with David, a local writer who taught creative writing workshops. Their first date was coffee that turned into a 4-hour conversation. David was easy to talk to, interesting, genuinely curious about Sarah's life without being nosy about her divorce. When she mentioned being recently divorced, he just nodded. "Me too," he said, "about 3 years ago. It's hard." They bonded over that shared experience of rebuilding. Sarah and David dated casually for about 6 months. He was kind, thoughtful, patient with her need to go slowly. But ultimately, they both realized they were better as friends than romantic partners. The chemistry just wasn't there. They ended things amicably, stayed friends, and Sarah felt good about it. She dated someone, trusted him enough to be vulnerable, and when it didn't work out, she'd handled it maturely without spiraling. That felt like progress. Her second serious relationship came 2 years after the divorce. His name was Tom Nakamura, also an educator, vice principal at a different high school. They met at a district leadership conference. Tom was recently widowed. His wife had died of cancer 2 years prior, so he understood grief and loss in a way most people didn't. They started as professional colleagues, gradually became friends, and eventually started dating. Tom was patient, respectful, never rushed Sarah. He understood that trust took time to rebuild. They'd been dating for about a year when this story picks up 5 years post-divorce, and Sarah was genuinely happy. Tom was solid, reliable, honest. Everything Michael hadn't been. Sarah also found purpose in helping other women going through divorce. She volunteered with a local nonprofit that provided resources and support to women leaving marriages. She'd meet with women one-on-one, sharing her story, offering advice about documentation, legal strategies, protecting yourself financially. She'd tell them about forensic accountants and private investigators. She'd explain Oregon divorce law, what they could reasonably expect to receive. She'd listen to their fears and reassure them they'd be okay. It was deeply fulfilling work, turning her worst experience into something that could help others. One woman, Jennifer, had been married to an emotionally abusive lawyer who controlled all their finances. She felt trapped, convinced she'd never be able to afford to leave. Sarah walked her through every step, helped her open a separate bank account her husband didn't know about, connected her with a good divorce attorney willing to defer fees, hired a forensic accountant who discovered the husband had been hiding assets. Jennifer's divorce took over a year, but she ended up with enough to start over comfortably. She sent Sarah a card after it was finalized. "You saved my life," it said. "I was drowning and you threw me a rope." Sarah kept that card on her desk as a reminder that her pain had purpose. The medical board's investigation took 3 months. They interviewed Vanessa, who confirmed the affair, said it was consensual, but admitted Michael was her direct supervisor. They reviewed practice policies, which explicitly prohibited relationships between doctors and subordinate staff. They examined whether patient care had been compromised. Their findings were damning. The board didn't revoke Michael's license, but they issued a formal reprimand, mandated ethics training, and placed him on probation. The practice fired him. No other major cardiology group in Portland would hire him. The doctor who'd built a successful career, who'd saved lives, including Sarah's father, was professionally ruined. The divorce settlement took 8 months to finalize. Robert was relentless. They went after everything. The house, which had increased significantly in value, went entirely to Sarah. Michael's retirement account, substantial after years of high earnings, was split, but Sarah got a larger share due to the adultery claim. His investment account, same thing. The cars, furniture, everything divided in Sarah's favor. Sarah also demanded and received compensation for emotional distress. The final settlement was $3.6 million in total assets and liquid cash. Michael left the marriage with his medical degree, his damaged reputation, and enough money to survive, but nowhere near what he'd built. He'd lost everything that mattered: his career, his income, his reputation, his wife, his home, his future. Vanessa lost too. The practice fired her along with Michael. The nursing board reviewed her conduct and issued a formal reprimand. Her reputation in Portland's medical community was ruined. She couldn't find work at any major healthcare facility. Sarah heard through the grapevine that Vanessa and Michael tried to stay together after everything fell apart. But the relationship didn't survive. Turns out, when you're not sneaking around, when there's no thrill, when you're just two people who destroyed lives for each other, the attraction fades. They broke up within 6 months. Last Sarah heard, Vanessa had moved out of state. Michael was working at a small clinic in Salem, making a fraction of what he'd made before, living in a modest apartment, alone. As for Sarah, the divorce was finalized exactly 1 year after her father's funeral. She'd gotten through the worst year of her life, losing her father and her marriage in the span of weeks, and she'd not just survived, but won. She kept the house, every room filled with memories of her father's last months. She remodeled his room into a library, a space to honor him. She returned to teaching with renewed purpose. Her students noticed she was different, harder in some ways, but also more present, more passionate. She threw herself into her work, developing new curriculum, mentoring new teachers, becoming department chair. She also started processing her trauma. The grief of losing her father and the betrayal of her marriage had tangled together, and she needed to separate them, to mourn each properly. She found a therapist who specialized in complicated grief and betrayal trauma. They worked together for 2 years, unpacking everything. Her therapist helped her see that she wasn't responsible for Michael's choices, that she'd done nothing wrong. The affair had nothing to do with her inadequacy and everything to do with his character. Her therapist also helped her mourn the marriage, not the man Michael had been, but the man she thought he was. That was the hardest part, grieving someone who never really existed. Sarah's brother James was her rock through everything. He'd been there at the funeral, had filmed that parking lot video that started everything, had supported her through the divorce. He told her once, "I wish I'd never seen them that day. I wish I didn't have to show you." She hugged him. "I'm glad you did. If you hadn't, I'd still be living a lie." Still, she sometimes wondered what would have happened if James hadn't filmed that video. Would she still be married to Michael, oblivious, thinking she had a good life? The thought made her sick. That video had saved her, even though it destroyed her. About a year after the divorce was finalized, Sarah went on her first date. A colleague set her up with a friend, a writer named David. They met for coffee. He was kind, interesting, and when Sarah told him about being recently divorced, he didn't pry. They dated casually for a few months. It didn't turn into anything serious, but it helped Sarah realize she was capable of trusting again, eventually. She wasn't ready for a serious relationship, maybe wouldn't be for years, but she was open to the possibility. That felt like progress. 2 years after her father's death, Sarah held a memorial at the cemetery. Just her and James. They brought flowers and stood at their father's grave and talked about everything that had happened. "Dad would be so proud of you," James said. "You didn't let Michael destroy you. You fought back." Sarah smiled sadly. "Dad taught me to stand up for myself, to know my worth. I just wish he'd been here to see it." But in a way, she felt like he had been. Every decision she'd made during those terrible months had been guided by the values her father had instilled: integrity, strength, refusing to accept betrayal. Her father had raised her to be the woman who could survive this. Sarah also started volunteering with a local organization that helped women going through divorce. She'd meet with women who were scared, confused, didn't know where to start, and she'd share her story. She'd tell them about documentation, about getting good lawyers, about protecting themselves financially. She'd tell them they were stronger than they knew, that they'd survive, that they'd be okay. One woman told her, "You're the only person who's made me believe I can get through this." Sarah hugged her. "You can, I promise." It was healing for Sarah, helping others, turning her worst experience into something that could benefit someone else. 3 years after the divorce, Sarah was invited to speak at a women's conference about surviving betrayal and rebuilding your life. She almost declined. Public speaking about something so personal felt vulnerable, exposing. But Tom encouraged her. "Your story could help people," he said, "and it's time to stop hiding what you went through." He was right. Sarah accepted the invitation. The conference was at a downtown Portland hotel, about 200 women in attendance. Sarah stood at the podium looking out at all those faces and felt nervous. But once she started talking, the words flowed. She told her story honestly: the happy beginning of her marriage, the slow decline, her father's death, the parking lot video, the discovery of the 3-year affair, the strategic takedown, the divorce settlement, the rebuilding. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She talked about the depression, the rage, the moments she wanted to give up. But she also talked about the strength she discovered, the life she'd built, the peace she'd found. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping, and suddenly the entire room was standing, applauding. Women were crying, nodding, clearly seeing themselves in Sarah's story. During the Q&A, question after question came. How did you stay strong? How did you know when to leave? How did you afford a good lawyer? Sarah answered everything honestly. She gave practical advice about documentation, about choosing attorneys, about protecting yourself financially, but she also gave emotional advice. Trust your instincts. Know your worth. Don't accept less than you deserve. You're stronger than you think. After her talk, at least 30 women lined up to speak with her privately. Each had her own story of betrayal, manipulation, feeling trapped. Sarah listened to everyone, gave what advice she could, exchanged contact information with those who needed ongoing support. That speaking engagement changed something for Sarah. She realized she had a platform, a voice, an experience that resonated with others. She started accepting more speaking invitations, women's shelters, divorce support groups, university women's studies classes. She always told her story the same way, honestly and completely. And always, women would come up afterward thanking her, saying she'd given them hope or courage or a roadmap for their own situations. It was healing work, transforming her trauma into something that could benefit others. Sarah also wrote about her experience, started with a blog, anonymous at first, detailing the signs of infidelity she'd missed, the strategies that worked for her divorce, the healing process. The blog gained a following quickly. Within 6 months, she had 10,000 regular readers. Women would comment, sharing their own stories, asking for advice. Sarah responded to every comment, built a community of women supporting each other through betrayal and divorce. Eventually, a literary agent reached out asking if she'd consider writing a book. Sarah was hesitant, but intrigued. She spent a year writing, working with the agent and an editor. The book, titled After the Funeral: Surviving Betrayal and Reclaiming Your Life, was published 4 years after her divorce. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found its audience. Women going through similar situations discovered it and found validation, strategy, hope. Sarah heard from readers all over the country thanking her for writing it, saying it had saved them. That felt like purpose. The book tour took Sarah to different cities, speaking at bookstores and community centers. In Seattle, a woman approached her after an event and said, "Your story gave me the courage to leave my husband. I've been unhappy for 10 years but felt trapped. Hearing how you rebuilt your life showed me it was possible." In San Francisco, another woman said, "I was blaming myself for my husband's affair. Your book helped me understand it wasn't my fault." In Phoenix, a woman in her 60s said, "I thought I was too old to start over. You proved I'm not." Every conversation reinforced that sharing her story mattered, that vulnerability was strength, that her worst experience had value if it could help even one person. Meanwhile, Michael's life continued its downward trajectory. Sarah heard updates occasionally through mutual connections, though she never sought them out. About 3 years post-divorce, she heard he'd tried to date seriously, a woman he met at the Salem clinic where he worked. It ended badly when she discovered his history, felt deceived that he hadn't been upfront about why he'd moved to Salem, why his career had stalled. After that, he seemed to give up on relationships, focus solely on work. But even that wasn't going well. The clinic where he worked had high turnover, poor management, constant staffing issues. Michael was overworked and underpaid. The promising career he'd built for 15 years was gone, replaced by thankless primary care work he'd never wanted to do. Vanessa's trajectory was similar. Sarah heard she'd moved to Arizona, tried to restart her nursing career there. But the ethics reprimand followed her. Hospitals would hire her, then discover her history with Michael, and she'd be let go or forced to resign. She eventually left healthcare entirely. Last Sarah heard was working in pharmaceutical sales. The career she'd trained for, spent years building, was over. Both Michael and Vanessa had sacrificed everything for an affair that hadn't even lasted. There was something almost pitiable about it. How thoroughly they'd destroyed their lives for what turned out to be nothing substantial. Sarah didn't wish them continued suffering, but she didn't feel bad for them either. They'd made choices. Choices have consequences. They were living theirs. 5 years after her father's death, Sarah held a memorial gathering at the cemetery. Family, friends, colleagues, former students came, about 40 people. Sarah gave a short speech about her father's life, his values, his impact. She talked about how he'd taught her strength and integrity, how those lessons had carried her through the hardest year of her life. After the ceremony, people shared memories, stories Sarah had never heard, moments that revealed different facets of who he'd been. It was beautiful, a proper celebration of his life. That night, Sarah stood in her kitchen making tea and thought about the trajectory of the last 5 years. Her father's death had been devastating. Discovering Michael's betrayal at the funeral had been crushing. The divorce had been brutal. But somehow, she'd emerged not just intact, but stronger. She had a career she loved, was principal now. She had genuine friendships, a relationship with Tom that was healthy. She had financial security. She had her father's house, filled with memories. She had purpose, helping other women. She had peace. The anger had faded, replaced by contentment. Not perfect happiness, but contentment. A sense that she was exactly where she needed to be. Sarah thought about that parking lot video sometimes, the one James had filmed. She'd watched it hundreds of times in those first weeks, analyzing every moment. She hadn't watched it in years now. She didn't need to. It had served its purpose, giving her proof, launching her fight. But it no longer defined her story. Her story wasn't about what Michael did to her. It was about what she did in response. How she refused to be a victim, how she strategized and fought and won, how she transformed trauma into purpose. That was the story that mattered. The relationship with Tom continued to deepen. He proposed about 18 months after they started dating, 5.5 years after Sarah's divorce. Simple, private, on a hike. "Sarah," he said, "I love you. I love your strength and kindness. I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" Sarah said yes without hesitation. She'd learned what real partnership looked like. Tom was that person. They got married a year later. Small ceremony, immediate family and close friends. James walked her down the aisle. It felt right. Full circle. Michael heard about Sarah's remarriage through mutual connections. He sent a brief email that she deleted without responding. She didn't need his blessing. That chapter was closed. Tom asked her once if she ever felt angry about the years lost to Michael. Sarah thought about it. "I used to," she said, "but not anymore. Those years taught me what I needed to learn, about myself, about what I deserve, about my strength. I wouldn't be who I am now without that. So no, I don't feel angry. I feel grateful I got out when I did." Sarah's work helping women continued. She became known as someone who'd survived spectacularly. Women would reach out. Sarah always made time, assessed situations, gave honest advice. Document more. File now. Are you sure about divorce? She never pushed her agenda. Some fought, some reconciled, some stayed stuck. Sarah respected all paths, just provided information for informed choices. The impact of her personal story rippled outward meaningfully. Her book was assigned in university courses. Law students read it. Therapists recommended it. It became a handbook for women facing infidelity. She showed surviving was possible. Fighting back was possible. Building better lives was possible. For women in despair, that message was everything. She ran into Michael once purely by accident. She was at Whole Foods shopping for dinner and turned a corner to see him standing in the produce section. He looked older, tired. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither said anything. Then he spoke. "Sarah." "How are you?" "Fine," she said. "You?" He shrugged. "Getting by. Working at a clinic." "It's okay." There was a long, awkward pause. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "for everything. I know it doesn't matter now, but I'm sorry." Sarah looked at him, this man she'd loved, who'd betrayed her so completely. "I appreciate that," she said, "but you're right. It doesn't matter now." She walked away. After, she felt oddly okay. She'd faced him and felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no longing. He was just a person she used to. No. That felt like closure. The thing Sarah realized, looking back on everything, was that the betrayal had been devastating, but also clarifying. It had forced her to see Michael clearly, to see her marriage clearly, to stop making excuses and rationalizations. The video James filmed had been a gift, even though it was wrapped in the worst possible circumstances. It had shown her the truth at a moment when she needed it most. Yes, discovering an affair at your father's funeral is cruel timing, but in some ways it was perfect timing. She was already grieving the loss of her father. Adding the loss of her marriage meant she could grieve both at once, process both, and emerge stronger. Sarah also realized she'd never been weak or stupid for not seeing the affair earlier. Michael had been deliberately deceptive, carefully hiding his tracks, gaslighting her when she questioned things. He'd used her trust against her. That wasn't her failure. That was his cruelty. Understanding that distinction was crucial to her healing. She hadn't failed as a wife. He'd failed as a husband and as a person. Now, 5 years after her father's death and 4 years after her divorce, Sarah Chen is 47 years old. She's the principal of Roosevelt High School, a position she earned through hard work and dedication. She owns her home outright, has a healthy savings account built from the divorce settlement, travels regularly, maintains strong relationships with family and friends. She's dating someone seriously for the first time since Michael, a fellow educator named Tom, who treats her with respect and kindness. She's cautious but hopeful. She's learned to trust her instincts, to see red flags, to value herself. She's learned that she's stronger than she ever imagined. Sometimes she thinks about that day at the funeral, watching the video her brother filmed. How devastating it was. how it felt like the floor was dropping out from under her. But she also thinks about what came after, how she methodically built a case, how she protected herself financially, how she made sure Michael faced consequences for his actions, how she didn't just survive but thrived. That feels like justice, not just that Michael lost his career and reputation and money, but that she won her life back, her peace, her self-respect, her future. And nobody, not Michael, not Vanessa, not anyone, could ever take that away from her. She'd made sure of it. The final lesson, if there is one, is this: betrayal can either destroy you or refine you. Sarah chose refinement. She took the worst moments of her life and used them to become someone stronger, wiser, more complete. She honored her father's memory by embodying the strength he'd taught her. She honored herself by refusing to accept betrayal and fighting for what she deserved. And she honored every woman going through similar pain by showing that survival is possible, that justice is possible, that happiness on the other side of devastation is possible. Her father's funeral had been the worst day of her life, but it had also been the beginning of her transformation from victim to survivor to victor, and that made all the difference. Thank you for watching this story. If you found it powerful, please subscribe to this channel for more stories of survival and justice. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And remember, if you're going through something similar, you're stronger than you know. You deserve better than betrayal, and justice, real justice, is absolutely possible. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.